Our dream trip to Paris began with the sweet scent of possibility, but quickly devolved into a nightmare when an officer's brazen act of violence unleashed a force far more powerful than his badge.
The smell of jet fuel and Cinnabon always meant adventure to me. It was the scent of possibility, of new horizons. And that day, the air in the bustling terminal was thick with it. My daughter, Maya, was practically vibrating with excitement next to me. At 16, the world was her oyster, and I just handed her a pearl, a graduation trip to Paris. 2 weeks of museums, pastries, and memories we cherish forever. Her eyes, the same deep brown as her mother's, were sparkling brighter than the lights on the Eiffel Tower she was so desperate to see. She clutched her passport like a holy relic, her smile so wide I thought her face might split. Everything was perfect. We checked our bags, navigated the check-in kiosks, and were now shuffling our way through the dreaded security line. It was the usual chaotic dance, laptops out, shoes off, belts in the bin. I went through first, no problem. I turned back, expecting to see Maya right behind me, but she was stuck at the metal detector. It had let out a sharp, insistent beep as she walked through. A TSA agent, a weary-looking woman, pointed her to the side for a secondary screening. Standard procedure, nothing to worry about. That's when he appeared. Officer Miller. I knew his name because it was stitched in bold blue letters above the pocket of his crisp, slightly too tight uniform. He wasn't TSA, he was airport police, and he walked with a swagger that told you he enjoyed his authority a little too much. He had a thick neck that bulged over his collar and a face that seemed permanently set in a smug scowl. He bypassed the TSA agent and zeroed in on my daughter. "What's the problem here?" he asked, his voice a low growl that didn't match the mundane situation. "The machine just beeped, sir," Maya said, her voice small and respectful. "It might be my hair clip." She reached up to touch a beautiful silver butterfly clip I bought her for the trip. It was intricate, a little piece of art nestled in her braids. "Keep your hands where I can see 'em," Miller snapped. His sudden hostility was a shock, like a blast of icy air. The people in line around us started to notice, their casual chatter dying down. I took a step forward. "Officer, it's just a hair clip. She can take it out." I kept my voice calm and even. The last thing you do in a situation like this is escalate. Miller didn't even look at me. His eyes were locked on Maya, a predator sizing up its prey. "I'll be the judge of that. Turn around, hands on the glass." He gestured to the clear partition beside them. Maya's eyes shot to me, wide with confusion and fear. This was escalating way too fast. "Sir, I don't understand," she began. "Did you not hear me? Turn around," he barked, his voice echoing slightly in the large hall. Now I was moving. "Hey, there's no need to speak to my daughter that way," I said, my voice hardening. "She's a minor. She's cooperating." Miller finally turned his head to glare at me. "You need to stay back, sir, or you'll be the one in cuffs. This is a secure area." He then turned back to Maya and did something that made my blood run cold. He reached out and grabbed her arm, his thick fingers digging into her bicep. It was pure instinct. Maya flinched and tried to pull her arm away, a frightened "ow" escaping her lips. That was all the excuse he needed. In a swift, brutal motion that I will see in my nightmares for the rest of my life, Officer Miller raised his free hand and slapped my daughter across the face. The sound was like a gunshot, a sharp, wet crack that silenced the entire terminal. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Maya stumbled back, her hand flying to her cheek where a bright red mark was already blooming. Tears instantly welled in her eyes, a mixture of pain and pure, unadulterated shock. Something inside me broke. A white-hot primal rage I'd never felt before surged through every vein in my body. Every instinct screamed at me to launch myself over the barrier and tear this man apart. But I couldn't. I knew that would only make things 1,000 times worse for Maya. So I froze. My hands clenched into fists so tight my knuckles were white, and I channeled all of that fire into my voice. You just hit my child, I said, my voice dangerously low and shaken with fury. Miller looked completely unfazed. If anything, he looked proud. He puffed out his chest, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. She's lucky that's all she got. Now, what are you gonna do about it, Dad? You gonna call your little lawyer? The crowd was a sea of phone screens now, all pointed at us. Miller didn't care. He felt untouchable. He felt powerful. He looked at me, this smug, uniformed bully who thought his badge made him a king. He thought he had all the power. And with that stupid, ugly smirk, he asked the question that would end his career. What are you gonna do about it, Dad? You gonna call your little lawyer? I didn't answer him. I didn't even look at him anymore. My entire world had shrunk to the tear-streaked face of my daughter. Ignoring the flimsy plastic stanchions, I stepped into the screening area, my hands held up and open to show I meant no harm. The weary TSA agent from before flinched back, but I walked right past her. "Maya, baby, look at me," I said, my voice softer than I thought possible. "Let me see." She lowered her hand from her cheek, and the sob that escaped her throat was a physical blow. The imprint of his hand was stark and brutal against her beautiful brown skin. My heart didn't just break, it atomized. "I told you to stay back," Miller bellowed, taking a step towards me, his hand instinctively going to the equipment on his belt. "Don't you touch him," Maya cried out, her fear momentarily replaced by a fierce protectiveness that made my chest ache with love. I put a hand on her shoulder, gently turning her to face me, shielding her from his gaze. "It's okay, sweetheart, it's okay." I looked into her eyes, the beautiful, bright eyes that were now filled with confusion and pain. "We're not going to Paris today. I'm so sorry." Another sob racked her body. The trip was the only thing she'd talked about for months, and this uniformed monster had shattered it in a single hateful moment. "That's right, your trip is canceled," Miller sneered from behind me. "In fact, you're both about to take a trip downtown for interfering with airport security." That's when I finally turned to face him again. The rage was still there, a simmering volcano beneath my skin, but my mind was suddenly ice cold and clear. I looked him dead in the eye, and with a calmness that seemed to unnerve him more than any shouting ever could, I slowly pulled out my phone. He let out a short, barking laugh. "Oh, here we go. Gonna record me? A little late for that, pal. Everyone else already is." I ignored him. I wasn't opening my camera. I went to my favorites and pressed the first name on the list. The phone barely had a chance to ring before a calm, professional voice answered on the other end. "It's me," I said, my voice low and steady. I could feel every eye in the security line on me. "We're at the airport, Terminal C, Checkpoint 4. There's been an incident." I listened for a moment, my gaze never leaving Officer Miller's face. His smirk was starting to falter, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "It's Maya," I continued, my voice catching slightly on her name. He put his hands on her. He hit her. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute, but I could feel the fury radiating through the phone. I didn't need to hear words. "Yes," I said finally, "I need you. I need you here, right now." I hung up without waiting for a reply. "Who was that? Your wife?" Miller scoffed, trying to regain his footing. "Gonna come down here and cry with the girl?" Just then, a portly sergeant with a salt and pepper mustache and a tired expression bustled onto the scene. "Miller, what the hell is all this? I've got calls about a riot at Checkpoint 4. "Situation's under control, Sarge," Miller said, puffing out his chest again. "This individual and his daughter were non-compliant. The girl got physical, so I had to use necessary force to restrain her." The lie was so blatant, so audacious, that a wave of murmurs and protests rippled through the crowd of onlookers. "He's lying," someone shouted. "He slapped that poor girl for no reason."
The sergeant, Davis, I think his name tag said, looked from Miller to me to Maya's crying form, and then at the sea of cell phones pointed in his direction. His face hardened. He was in damage control mode. "All right, that's enough," he announced to the crowd. "Disperse. This is a secure area." He then turned to me. "Sir, I need you and your daughter to come with me. We'll get this sorted out in the office." I shook my head. "No." "Sir, that wasn't a request," Sergeant Davis said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "You're interfering with a federal security checkpoint." "And your officer assaulted a minor," I shot back. "We're not going anywhere. We are going to wait right here." "Wait for who?" Davis asked, exasperated. "The president?" Before I could answer, the atmosphere in the terminal shifted. It was palpable. A hush fell over the area, starting from the entrance to the security line and spreading like a wave. The crowd of onlookers, who had been a chaotic mass of bodies and phones, suddenly parted, creating a wide, clear path. And through that path walked a woman. She wasn't in uniform. She was dressed in a charcoal gray pantsuit, impeccably tailored, her black heels clicking on the polished floor with a sound like a judge's gavel. She moved with an unhurried, unstoppable purpose, an aura of pure, undiluted authority radiating from her. Her face was a mask of cold, controlled fury, and her eyes, the same deep brown as my daughter's, scanned the scene. They took in the TSA agents, begawking passengers, my daughter's bruised cheek, and finally, they landed on Officer Miller. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 20 degrees. Sergeant Davis took a step forward, his hand raised. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, you can't be back here. This is a restricted." The woman didn't even look at him. She held up one hand, a simple, dismissive gesture that stopped him cold in his tracks. Her entire focus, her entire being was lasered in on the man who had hurt her family. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it cut through the silence of the entire terminal, laced with steel and a promise of ruin. "Officer," she said, her eyes boring into Miller's, "take your hands off my husband." Officer Miller stared, his mouth slightly agape. The swagger, the smug confidence, it all evaporated in an instant, leaving behind a pasty-faced man in a uniform that suddenly looked 2 sizes too big. He didn't just take his hands off me, he recoiled as if I were red hot. He looked at the woman, then at me, then at Maya, who was now staring at her mother with a look of awe. The pieces were clicking into place in his slow-moving brain, and the resulting picture was one of pure, abject terror. "Ma'am, I didn't realize," he stammered, his bravado gone, replaced by the pathetic whimpering of a cornered animal. My wife ignored him completely. She walked right past him, right past the dumbstruck Sergeant Davis, and came straight to us. She didn't hug us, not yet. She first cupped Maya's face in her hands, her thumbs gently tracing the edge of the red mark on her cheek. The cold fury on her face melted away, replaced by an ocean of maternal pain and love. "Oh, my sweet girl," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She pulled Maya into a fierce embrace, and my daughter just dissolved into her mother's arms, the rigid, terrified posture she'd been holding finally collapsing into ragged sobs. My wife held her for a long moment, then looked over Maya's shoulder at me. No words were needed. We'd been married for 20 years. Her eyes said everything. "Are you okay? I'm here now. I will handle this." I just nodded, my own throat tight with unshed tears of relief and rage. After a moment, she released Maya, holding her at arm's length. "Go stand with your father," she commanded softly. We moved to the side, a small family unit against the world, and then she turned. And the mask of fury, colder and more terrifying than before, slammed back into place. She addressed Sergeant Davis, but her eyes never left Miller. "Sergeant, detain your officer, now." It wasn't a request. It was an order delivered with the full weight of the law behind it. Sergeant Davis, to his credit, was starting to understand the magnitude of what had just happened. He blinked, swallowed hard, and looked at Miller, who was now sweating profusely. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I need to know who you are. This is an official—" "You will know who I am soon enough," she cut him off, her voice like cracking ice. "But right now, you have an officer who has committed assault and battery on a minor, on federal property, in full view of at least 50 witnesses in their cameras. He is a flight risk and a danger to the public. You will confiscate his weapon, you will place him in custody, and you will wait for the proper authorities to arrive. Or I promise you, by the end of the day, you will be directing traffic in the long-term parking lot, in the rain. Am I making myself clear?" Sergeant Davis's face went pale. He knew. He didn't know who she was specifically, but he knew she was not someone you said no to. He looked at Miller, whose face had gone from pale to a sickly shade of gray. "Miller," Davis said, his voice grim, "give me your sidearm. Unload it and place it on the bin." "Sarge, you can't be serious," Miller protested, his voice cracking. She's his wife. It's a conflict of interest. She's trying to intimidate us." That was a mistake, a colossal one. My wife took a slow, deliberate step toward him. "Intimidate you, Officer Miller?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "I assure you, if I wanted to intimidate you, you would know it. What I am doing now is giving a lawful directive to a fellow officer of the court to prevent the spoliation of evidence and the further endangerment of civilians. You assaulted my daughter. You put your hands on my husband, and you did it all with a smirk on your face because you believed your badge made you immune. You believed you were the law." She paused, letting her words hang in the silent, cavernous space. She let him stew in the terrified silence, let every single person watching absorb the weight of what was happening. "Officer," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, a sound more menacing than any shout could ever be. "I am the one who judges the law." The collective gasp from the crowd was audible. Sergeant Davis's eyes widened in dawning horror. Miller looked like he was going to be physically sick. The full, terrifying truth of the situation finally crashed down on him. He hadn't just slapped some random girl. He hadn't just gotten into a power play spat with some random dad. He had assaulted the daughter in front of the husband of the person who would very likely preside over his case. "Your Honor?" Sergeant Davis breathed, the words barely audible. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Detain him, Sergeant," she repeated, her voice flat and final. This time, there was no hesitation. "Miller, cuffs, now!" Davis barked, finally snapping into action. He pulled out his own set of handcuffs as another airport officer, sensing the seismic shift in power, hurried over to assist. Miller just stood there, paralyzed by fear. He looked at me, at Maya, and then at my wife, his eyes pleading. The smug bully was gone, replaced by a terrified child about to get the spanking of a lifetime. He started to tremble, his hands shaking uncontrollably as his colleagues approached him. And then, as Sergeant Davis reached out to take his arm, it happened. A dark, wet patch blossomed on the front of Officer Miller's crisp khaki trousers. It spread rapidly, a visible stain of his terror. He hadn't just lost control of the situation, he had lost control of his own body. The man who had terrorized my daughter, who had stood there so proud and mighty, had just wet himself in the middle of the airport terminal, in front of hundreds of people. The smell was unmistakable. A few people in the crowd started to laugh, a mixture of shock and dark humor. But I didn't laugh. I just held my daughter tighter, because I knew this wasn't over. This was a messy, public, and humiliating beginning. But my wife, Judge Eleanor Vance, was only just getting started. And I saw the look in her eye as she watched the disgraced officer being cuffed. It wasn't a look of victory. It was a look that promised a reckoning. The apathetic grumbling of the airport terminal had been replaced by a stunned, almost reverent silence, broken only by the quiet sobbing of my daughter and the clicking of handcuffs. Miller didn't resist. He couldn't. He stood there, a defeated, urine-soaked statue of disgrace, as Sergeant Davis and another officer led him away. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea, a gauntlet of phone cameras documenting his every shameful step. Nobody cheered his downfall, but you could feel the collective exhale, the release of tension that comes when a bully finally gets what's coming to him. My wife, Eleanor, watched him go, her expression unreadable. Once he was out of sight, she turned back to us, and the formidable judge vanished, replaced instantly by the mother and wife I knew. She drew both Maya and me into a three-way hug right there in the middle of the security checkpoint. "Let's go home," she whispered, and it was the best thing I had ever heard. The next few hours were a blur of official procedure, but with Eleanor at the helm, it was a calm and controlled storm. We were escorted to a private office. Statements were taken, not by Sergeant Davis, but by a crisp, professional-looking detective from the city's police department, who had apparently broken several traffic laws to get there so quickly. He treated us with a deference that bordered on awe, addressing my wife as "Your Honor" in every sentence. He took Maya's statement first, gently and patiently, making her feel safe and heard. Through her tears, she recounted the entire incident with a clarity and strength that made me prouder than I could ever say. Our Paris trip was, of course, canceled. The airline was more than accommodating, refunding everything without a single question once they got a sanitized version of events. But the adventure Maya had been dreaming of was tainted, replaced by a trauma that would take time to heal. That was the part that fueled my rage. The trip could be rescheduled. Her sense of safety in the world, however, was a much more fragile thing. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in quiet, methodical justice. Eleanor, true to her word, recused herself from presiding over any potential case. The conflict of interest was obvious, but her very involvement ensured that the case wouldn't be swept under the rug. The 50-plus cell phone videos from the terminal went viral within hours. Officer Miller was suspended without pay almost immediately, and the airport authority and the police department tripped over themselves issuing public apologies. But apologies weren't enough, not for Eleanor. She didn't fight the battle in the press. She fought it in the system she knew better than anyone. She made calls. She guided our civil lawyer, a man who was one of the best in the state and also happened to be Maya's godfather. A lawsuit was filed, not just against Miller, but against the airport authority for negligent hiring and inadequate training. Miller, it turned out, had a history of excessive force complaints, all of which had been quietly dismissed internally. His file was a roadmap of red flags that had been willfully ignored. The criminal case proceeded swiftly. With overwhelming video evidence and dozens of eyewitnesses, Miller's lawyer knew a trial was unwinnable. He pled guilty to assault and battery and official misconduct. He lost his job, his pension, and was sentenced to 2 years of probation, mandatory anger management, and 500 hours of community service. It didn't feel like enough, but it was a permanent stain on his record. He would never carry a badge or a gun again. The civil suit was where the real reckoning happened. Faced with the mountain of evidence and the damning personnel file, the airport authorities settled out of court. The amount was substantial, more than enough to pay for Maya's college education 10 times over. But we didn't want the money for ourselves. A few months later, on a crisp autumn morning, we stood on the steps of a community center. A new sign was being unveiled. It read, "The Maya Vance Foundation for Youth Justice." The entire settlement, every single penny, had been used to create a foundation dedicated to providing legal aid and advocacy for young people, especially minorities who had been victims of police misconduct. At the press conference, Maya stood at the podium. She was no longer the frightened girl in the airport. She stood tall, her voice clear and strong, a new kind of confidence radiating from her. She spoke about her experience, not with anger, but with a purpose that silenced the crowd. She spoke about turning pain into power, about ensuring that what happened to her wouldn't happen to others without consequence. Standing beside her, holding her hand, was my wife. Eleanor wasn't there as a judge. She was there as a proud mother. As I looked at them, my two incredible, powerful women, I knew that Officer Miller hadn't broken us. He hadn't won. He had inadvertently forged my daughter into a warrior and reminded us all of the power of fighting back. That evening, I found Maya sitting in the living room looking at a new brochure on her laptop. It was for a language immersion program in Spain. She looked up at me and smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Spain looks nice," she said. "It does," I agreed, sitting next to her. "I was thinking," she said, her voice thoughtful, "maybe we don't need Paris. Maybe the adventure isn't about the place you go. Maybe it's about what you do when you get there." I wrapped my arm around her shoulder and pulled her close. The smell of jet fuel and Cinnabon no longer felt like the scent of possibility. But here in our home, surrounded by the strength and love of our family, I could smell something new. It was the scent of resilience. It was the scent of justice. And it smelled a whole lot like victory.